I've never really enjoyed upfront personal customer service. I like to be the guy behind the scenes, making the deal, finding the stuff, getting it ready, giving it to someone who is in a mindset to run a retail store. Had I just agreed to partner informally with a hoarder to resell my products, I was beginning to wonder. If we go back to my story about my short time being a partner in a brick and mortar consignment store, we can talk about this. It's a good story, because that's where this is headed. The gentleman said for him to move into that retail shop, because the rents were higher in town than where he was, could I contribute to the lease? Could I contribute to him so he could get a lease? And I thought about it, and I said, well, it's a bigger shop. There's enough room for me to bring more product. And I was especially in need of a place to bring furniture that was coming out of storage units, bigger items that I couldn't eBay, that weren't going to draw much interest on Facebook, but that someone browsing might want. So I talked it over with Rose, and we agreed, and the guy gave us an estimate of what we would need to contribute to get about 25% of the square footage. I had known this guy for a while. He ran a shop in Bremerton, Washington. I met him because he was willing to take some of my products, and this is back when Rose and I were clearing storage units, so product was coming faster than I could process it and get it out to the auctions or get it up on eBay. And Craigslist, though it was good for things like tools and lumber, it wasn't so good for general household merchandise. But this guy had a shop. He liked collectibles. He'd take items in bins. I'd prep the items. He'd put them out when he had the chance or when he had an open spot on his shelf. And this went on for a while, and basically my effort was to find the stuff, prep it, get it over to him by the trailer load, put it in his back room. A month or so later, I'd bring him another group, I'd pick up the check. It was never huge money, but it was minimal involvement on my part. And it was a way for me to work in the retail operation without actually having to be there on set hours. I didn't handle the money in his cash box. I didn't meet his customers. But there came a day when the county told him that the building he had been using wasn't zoned properly and wasn't outfitted. I think it was handicapped ramps and bathrooms and parking spots, but for some reason the county said he couldn't run a retail operation out of there, and they gave him a time frame to be moved. So he had to start looking for new retail space. And that's where I got a little more involved with this. He started asking me about prospects because he knew I worked for an auction house and he knew I was in the greater reselling industry. And I had my own views about what was a suitable spot. I always felt that if you're going to run a secondhand store or a thrift store or a resale shop, that it should be co-located with other buildings that will draw a crowd. And him and I had a couple of long talks about that, because if he moved his operation and I was going to continue to bring him things, I was concerned about the venue, because you change the location, you change how well received the products are. One place he looked at was in a shopping center where there was already a thrift store, and he saw that as a negative. And I told him, I said, I actually think that's a positive. Your customers are already going to be there. They've got a mindset to go looking in a thrift store or consignment store, and you may pick up some of the business. A lot of these stores are one-offs. So if a shopper goes in and they don't find what they want, and you're the next building in the shopping center, I don't see a problem with that. You may get the sale. For instance, later I would use one that was in the same shopping center as a Goodwill and a Petco and a Radio Shack. If people dropped their pet off at Petco for a grooming, they would duck in next door to the consignment store. If they finished at Radio Shack and they had some time, maybe they'd come into a thrift store to see what might be available. If they went into Goodwill, because again, Goodwill, of course, being a big operation, but in those days they still sold a lot of used one-off product. So if they went looking for a pair of, say, size 12 shoes and they didn't find what they want in Goodwill, they'd duck into the next thrift store. And if you happen to be co-located, people of the same mindset would shop in your store when they were done with Goodwill, especially if you could offer them a better price. He invited me along a couple of times to look at some. And he told me, he said, with these prices, what would you think about going in with me? You pay part of the rent. You bring stuff, we'll get it out on the floor and we'll sell your stuff. That's pretty much the arrangement him and I had had all along. But now he wanted me to contribute cash, and I said for that I'll need a better return on my products. If I brought items to the old store and they sat for a while, that didn't really affect me because I was out there getting more sources. I was out getting more items. And he was just one of the multiple streams of income I had, because I was also using auctions. I was selling directly on Craigslist. I was using eBay. So I had my retirement income. So I had multiple streams of income. In those days, Rose was still working in town as well. She was working a part-time job. So we had several streams of income. So if my product sat in his old store for a little while, it didn't matter. The only real problem was if the backlog of bins in his back room kept growing, then I was going to have a problem. But I told him, yeah, bigger store, more turnover, more sales, yeah, I can contribute. So as he looked around for a new venue, he found one. And he seemed pretty keen on it. And I went and looked at it with him. He thought it was the best shot at moving his business. He was on a timeline, big space, bigger than his old one. But I saw some instant shortcomings. For one, it had a small back room and a back door for stocking and cleaning and prepping, but that door did not have an access to a parking lot. So you couldn't back a truck or a trailer to that door and bring in inventory. All the inventory was going to have to come through the store, through the front door, and the floors were carpeted. Now that looks really great for a boutique, but for a general merchandise shop, carpeting and hand trucks do not go hand in hand. I could only envision us ruining the carpet and being handed a bill. And the bulk of the off-floor storage was on a second floor. And that bothered me a little bit too, because I was already getting a little older at that point, and the idea of taking things like lazy boy recliners or end tables, because that's really what we wanted to use the store for. Rose and I were emptying storage units, and we needed venues for larger items. Small items could go on eBay. Tools, they could be sold on Craigslist. But if we cleared a storage unit and it had household goods and larger household goods, we needed a venue. He went against my advice, and he did lease that store, and I agreed to contribute. Just before the deal was struck, it turned out that his fees and his added costs were going to be higher, like signage. So he came back for a bigger percentage, and I told him, if you're gonna ask me to contribute more, I'm going to need more say in how the items are displayed, how they're priced. Because in the old store, I just let him price the items according to what he thought he could get from similar items that he would stock himself. Well, he was always pricing items a little higher than I would, which became a central issue as this story unfolds. But he leased it. He leased it for a year. Rose and I began moving stuff in. One of the first items we brought in was a very large bedroom set, probably one of the largest and fanciest Rose and I had ever hauled. And at the soft opening, because we had a soft opening for the store first, we sold it. We sold it within the first day or two. And then we put other things in the space that it had occupied. And pretty much I had about 25% of the store on one side, and he had 3/4, And then there was another room with display cases for jewelry and watches and things, coins. He obviously wanted to be the senior partner. His vision of what we were about to do and my vision of what we were about to do turned out to be very different. He expected me to contribute 25% and pretty much run the way we had. I would drop off stuff, he would put it out, set up the displays, collect the money, give me a check. No, my thoughts were that if I was going to contribute more, I'd been paying him a fee for his service of selling for me without me being present. He was basically making a commission off every one of my sales. But if I was going to step up and owe him money every month, regardless of how much sold, I wanted a bigger say in how that place was run. And in the end, right before he signed the lease, he had to come back and ask me for an even bigger hunk because he figured out that he was going to need things like signage and permits and maybe some more shelving and fixtures. Rose and I assessed it and we said, okay, we'll try this. But I wasn't really happy with the location of the venue or the arrangement of the building. As I mentioned, there was no real loading dock. And the bulk of the off-floor storage was on a second floor. It was on a mezzanine. And that meant if that Rose and I were bringing in products and if there was no room out on the floor, it was going to have to be carried to the second story. Because the idea of storage for overflow product was one of the reasons I had agreed to this. If there was room for me to store things and prep things other than at my house, it was a good idea. And like I say, I have a feeling this guy turns out he was maybe seeing this whole operation as like a clubhouse for him to avoid going home and to give him a place to display his collections. Because that's one of the things that became evident. We did a soft opening. And just before that soft opening, Rose and I basically were still clearing storage units. And I found one of the biggest, nicest master bedroom furniture suites I'd ever handled. I think there were 8 or 9 pieces to this thing. And we had an empty store. So we came in, we set it up, made it pretty, put on comforters, put lamps. We made a little vignette because I'd been making vignettes to sell for the auction for many years. So I thought I was pretty good at it. Soft opening came, things sold. I think the first day, the second day, and Rose and I were in the back room bringing out other things, dressers, wicker baskets, things like that. They kept selling. The stuff in our corner kept selling. I don't think he was making any sales. I'm not sure he made a sale all weekend for that soft opening. But it became apparent pretty quickly that he was setting up static displays, almost like each of his collections was arranged and on display. Disney figurines over here, collectible dishware over here, and he was pricing it high enough people weren't buying it. Rose and I were pricing to flip this because we had more coming in. Our idea was price it fairly, move it quickly, reload the store. And this began to send the guy and I on a diverging path. And I began to get the idea that this guy was actually a closet hoarder. He wasn't all that interested in selling his product. If people wouldn't come up to his price, it sat there. And it sat there. From our point of view, we were selling. We were selling fairly quickly. It was helping us contribute to the rent and the costs of operating the building. In some cases, we sold very similar products much cheaper. And that bothered him too, that Rose and I were putting price tags on our items to move it. But it turns out, and I didn't know this at the time until I had to get more involved, I didn't know that he was one of those guys. I think he was almost running that place like a clubhouse to avoid going home. It was like he was setting up these static displays, and when a shopper would come in and move something, or I wouldn't align the items I was offering the way he would have, he was getting a little twitchy. It finally all came to a head when I set up a big holiday display table on my part, And when I came in the next day, it had all been moved, rearranged, and set up according to the way he wanted to. Because he said, I thought you were just going to drop stuff off and let me display it and price it. And I said, no, I told you, if I'm going to be paying you a monthly rent for you to cover your lease, I've got to have more say. So in the end, him and I split. The arrangement didn't last very long to begin with. He had signed a year lease, and he kept that store open. But that store was in a pretty bad location, and I had told him so. There was nothing around it except for a heavy equipment rental place and an activity center where kids climbed walls or threw parties. So it wasn't the kind of place parents were coming to shop. It was kind of a bad choice. So there wasn't a lot of traffic related to reselling. So I don't think he ever really did well beyond the grand opening and beyond Rose and I moving product, because we were pricing to sell, because we had a constant stream that we needed to move. And looking back, I have to wonder if he was actually a collector or a hoarder in disguise. And I learned several things about retail spaces and selling operations from that short experience. Videos about reselling should fairly show the issues on both sides, the benefits as well as the negatives. I'm Brian. I'm at the lake. I think Rose and I are going to go dig a ditch. After dealing with eBay for 2 days and the issue, which is up on another video, I think I'll go sling a pick and a shovel and burn some anxiety. I'm Brian. I'm at the lake. Enjoy your day. I'm trying to. The sky is dark and ominous today, as if it knows Halloween is coming. Even the lake has been unusual this week. The mist, the morning fog, it's like it's trying out for an episode to be the backdrop for a movie like The Swamp Thing.